This Sunday, nervous Democrats.
To say that this president has not shown urgency is just false.
Growing criticism from Democrats that President Biden needs to show some fight. From abortion.
We want the president to absolutely crawl into every corner and say, what can we do to help?
To guns.
If you're angry today, I'm here to tell you, be angry. I'm furious.
To the economy. Mr. Biden says his options are limited and Republicans are standing in the way.
That's why my plan is not finished and why the results aren't finished either.
I'll talk to Commerce Secretary Gina Raimondo. Plus the Republicans' leadership challenge.
Get Murkowski out of here because she's not a Republican.
How much influence does former President Trump still have on the GOP? Maryland's Republican Governor Larry Hogan joins me. Also, former White House counsel Pat Cipollone testifies before the January 6th committee after Cassidy Hutchinson's explosive appearance.
Please make sure we don't go up to the Capitol. We're going to get charged with every crime imaginable if we make that movement happen.
I'll talk to committee member Congresswoman Stephanie Murphy about what Cipollone told the committee. And tweet this. Elon Musk says he wants out of his $44 billion deal to buy Twitter over a dispute about spam accounts.
He's just reaching out for something to blame, but he has to pay.
We'll hear from Kara Swisher, co-host of Vox Media's Pivot podcast. Joining me for Insight and Analysis are NBC News senior Washington correspondent Hallie Jackson, Mark Leibovich of The Atlantic, Daniela Gibbs-Leger of the Center for American Progress, and Rich Lowry, editor of National Review. Welcome to Sunday. It's Meet the Press.
From NBC News in Washington, the longest-running show in television history, this is Meet the Press with Chuck Todd.
Good Sunday morning. The phrase you hear most often these days when frustrated Democrats talk about President Biden is meet the moment, as in, can President Biden meet the moment? Americans arguably elected Joe Biden for two reasons. One, because he wasn't Donald Trump, and two, because he was going to bring some stability and competence to the White House and calm the country down, turn down the volume, if you will. And while Mr. Biden certainly has succeeded in not being Donald Trump, many more progressive Democrats complain that the president needs to show more passion, bang the table, raise the volume, take some chances, challenge the boundaries. In other words, meet the moment that these crises have entailed. All the talk about Mr. Biden's lack of passion is really code for concern about his age. So is the criticism fair? Mr. Biden has actually delivered the presidency he promised. He's been the grown-up who plays by the rules. Some think plays by the rules too well. And he does try to work with Republicans when he can, though some think he shouldn't try so much. But the Democrats' progressive base has always wanted more, and Mr. Biden was never their first choice. So even if the criticism isn't fair, the sentiment is real. And potential Democratic White House hopefuls are quietly, and in some cases not so quietly, preparing to have their moment if the president doesn't meet his.
What we have going on is a massive human rights violation in our country, and he's not responding to that level.
As many Democrats plead for a fighter, President Biden is pointing out the limits of his power.
I'm just stating a basic fundamental notion. The fastest way to restore Roe is to pass a national law codifying Roe.
After signing an executive order on access to abortion medication and emergency contraception.
If you want to change the circumstances for women and even little girls in this country, please go out and vote.
But some Democrats who did vote in 2020 are frustrated with the administration's failure to push through their agenda, pass the big-ticket legislation, and Biden's own reluctance or inability to use the bully pulpit to change people's minds.
Democrats don't fight hard enough for nothing. Like right now, we might as well be in a recession, and they're not even trying to fight to help or nothing. And Biden, to me, he just talking circles.
Biden was elected to restore competency and stability to Washington after Donald Trump. But his job approval trails other recent presidents, including Trump, at this point in the election cycle. After a lingering pandemic, the chaotic withdrawal from Afghanistan, failure to stem rising costs, failure to pass voting rights legislation, and a failure to substantially address climate change or immigration challenges.
Has the Biden administration done a good job handling the border?
They haven't done enough, no.
Whispers that Biden's age and leadership style make him ill-suited to run again in 2024 have gone very public.
If he served out a second term, he would be 86 years old. I'm not sure if any of us know of any 86-year-olds who should be running the entire country.
I'm not going to weigh in on whether or not he should run. If he does run, he'll have my support.
Echoed by voters.
Given what he was handed, he's really doing a very good job, but we do need younger voices.
My understanding that part of the wager in 2020 was that he was only going to run once.
And some Democrats eyeing 2024 are stepping into the vacuum. California Governor Gavin Newsom even aired TV ads over the July 4th weekend in Florida.
I urge all of you living in Florida to join the fight or join us in California, where we still believe in freedom.
Illinois Governor J.B. Pritzker, who took a trip to New Hampshire last month, had a fire response to last week's mass shooting.
If you're angry today, I'm here to tell you, be angry. I'm furious.
Now Biden, who ran promising to be a transitional figure to a new generation.
Look, I view myself as a bridge, not as anything else.
Is trying to tamp down speculation he may not be on the ballot in 2024. As voters who elected Biden to be above the fray worry he's not well suited for the current fight ahead.
I think his energy matters. I want to see him out here fighting for these things. And if he is, then I'll support him.
And joining me now is the Commerce Secretary, Gina Raimondo, also the former governor of Rhode Island. Secretary Raimondo, welcome to Meet the Press.
Good morning.
Look, your purview in many ways is the economy largely. And so let me ask a simple question this way. What do you attribute to the fact that 3/4 of the country feel like the country's headed in the wrong direction? How much of it is economic in your view?
I think quite a bit of it is economic, and specifically, I think it's inflation. So, look, obviously, it's frustrating. If you were to ask me, what do I think of the economy? I'd say we have a very strong economy. Unemployment is down. We've recovered all the jobs since lost in the pandemic. People's household balance sheets are strong. However, when you go to the grocery store, prices are high. When you fill up your car at the tank, prices are high. And so consumers, Americans, are feeling that. And I think that is largely the reason folks say, as you said, we're headed in the wrong direction. But if I was just talking to a CEO of a big company and asking him, as I always do, talking to people, what do you think about the economy? And he said, the economy's strong. Customers are buying. Businesses are strong. People are adding jobs. He said, we're trying to talk ourselves into a recession. And I agree with that. I think fundamentally the economy is strong, but if you go to the grocery store every day, getting ready for that summer picnic and prices are high, people feel frustrated, and, we get that.
I want to talk about a couple things that the administration hasn't done yet that have been thought of as pretty good short-term solutions. I was talking with Stephanie Murphy, a Democratic congresswoman from Florida, and she pointed out three things, and I've heard this from others. Getting rid of many of these Trump tariffs, in boosting legal immigration, and implementing an all-of-the-above energy policy. I'm going to take the first two. You would like to see some of these Trump tariffs gotten rid of on household items. You're not the only one in the administration. Why hasn't it happened yet?
The president is in the process of making that decision. I want to say a couple things about this. We should be clear about what lifting tariffs would and wouldn't do. Right? Like, lifting tariffs isn't going to bring down top-line inflation in a very significant way. What it will do, potentially, is help consumers on certain, as you say, household goods. And so, for that reason, given where inflation is, I think it could make sense to do it. But, the president is being thoughtful about this, unlike President Trump. Those tariffs that he imposed made no sense. And so we are briefing him, and I expect he'll make a decision shortly. And if he decides to lift certain tariffs, it will be because he knows he has to think about doing everything he possibly can to provide any relief to consumers. But he's going to do it in a thoughtful way that is strategic, and also most important to him and to all of us is without hurting American workers. And that's what we're trying to get done here. With respect to immigration, that's an issue for Congress to take up, and I think that, it's a discussion that we should have. Everybody knows, ask any economist,
Isn't it the single biggest driver, actually,
economic growth
right now, with our supply chain problems, with the labor pressure, with all of this, that in many ways, this inflationary pressure, in some ways, is this labor shortage on the lower end of the scale, right?
In a lot of ways, absolutely. Not in some ways. It's a huge driver, and so increasing the labor supply would certainly help. The other thing we need to do, though, is get women back into the workforce. You talk about the single biggest issues.
Yeah.
Look at workforce participation of women without a college degree. We have to be there for those women. To get child care, to, reproductive health is on everybody's mind. That's going to hurt the economy. Child care, health care, skills. Train these women so that they're able to get jobs that are available today and be productive members of the workforce. If you're serious about the labor shortage, lean in to making sure women can fully participate.
On the issue of energy prices, the president proposed a gas tax holiday. There's been crickets in Congress. What other ideas do you have to lower the price of gas?
So that is one, and hopefully Congress takes action. The other thing the president's working on is just increasing supply. Fundamentally, this inflation we're experiencing, whether it's gas or goods, is being driven by a lack of supply. Now, there's some good news, right? You saw wholesale gas prices drop significantly recently. I think that's due to the increased supply, and now we have to make sure consumers feel that at the pump. But the president is pushing producers domestically and globally to increase supply so that consumers start to feel it at the pump.
You brought up abortion rights, and it's interesting, whether it's inflation, whether it's abortion rights, whether it's yet another gun massacre in Illinois, there's a growing group of Democrats that are frustrated, believe that the president isn't showing enough energy, isn't showing enough fight on any of these issues. Is any of this criticism, in your view, justified?
No. Look, it's not about who's the best performer. This isn't about, performative. This is about who's going to go to work every day and get the job done and deliver for women. I have to say, on a personal level, I first fell in love with Senator Biden way back when he was fighting for the Violence Against Women Act. I was an intern at the Department of Justice. This is a guy who has devoted decades to working to help women, to provide women rights, and he's fighting every day now. He just signed the executive order to preserve women's health care and reproductive rights.
Does that executive order, what does that order do other than tell everybody to follow the law? I mean, I don't. It looks like it's a glorified press release.
Well, you put your finger on an issue. A lot of the things that are coming the president's way, he doesn't have a silver bullet to solve. I mean, these issues have to be solved by Congress, or in this case, the Supreme Court and Congress. So he's doing what a good executive does, which is go to his team and say, give me every option, every tool in my toolbox. And that's what this executive order does. He's pushing the limits of his authority to stand up for women who've had a right taken away. And that's what I know people are frustrated. That folks are cranky with a lot of good reason. But we have to focus on who's going to work every day and solving these problems, not who uses the most fiery language. It's who's going to stick up for women and deliver for them, whether it's health care, reproductive rights, or jobs, or training, or child care. And that's President Biden.
Secretary Gina Raimondo, Commerce Secretary, and as I said, the former governor of Rhode Island. Appreciate you coming on, sharing your perspective with us.
Thanks, Chuck.
You got it. From one party's leadership challenge to another, the Republican Party is also facing one. Former President Trump still wields huge influence on Republicans in Congress, but Republican governors collectively have been able to maintain some independence from him. You're starting to see that spread. Joining me now is the Republican governor of Maryland, Larry Hogan. Governor Hogan, welcome back to Meet the Press.
Good morning.
You've been sort of alone on this for years, saying the governors are pushing back, and you're starting to see more evidence of that. But I want to start overseas. Is there anything to be learned by the party from what the conservatives, the Tories, did with their unpopular and controversial leader?
Well, I think maybe not getting away from what the basic tenets of your party are, and changing direction. And I think he did some crazy things that didn't make the public very happy, and he lost his position.
Why isn't the America's Conservative Party doing the same thing with their leader?
Well, I would argue that we are. It's just taking longer than it should. As you pointed out, I've been talking about this for years now, and I felt like I was on a lifeboat, all by myself. But now we need a bigger boat because more and more people are speaking out every day. I was chair of the National Governors Association. We were pushing back all throughout COVID. But I've said that President Trump's influence on the party was going to diminish over time. It hasn't happened, rapidly, but it has diminished dramatically. And there are only about 34% of Republican primary voters who want to see the president run again.
You're in this awkward spot, and I know you work with a lot of these governor's races around the country. Governor Kemp was able to push back a Trump influence.
Yeah.
But you look at what's happening in Arizona, and there's a fight there. You look what's happening in Maryland.
Yep.
You have a fight there. You look at what's happening in Michigan, and there's no anti-Trump candidate because of some really bad campaign tactics, if you will. You win some, you lose some. Arizona and Michigan are pretty tough ones to lose, no?
Well, I agree, but it's an example of the fact that Trump's influence is diminishing. So I'm on the RGA executive committee. There were 5 different governors where Trump was attacking them. All of them won. I mean, I went down and did events for Brian Kemp. A couple of my staffers are down working in his campaign. Brian Kemp won by 52 points, and Brad Little won, and Kay Ivey won, and a number of other, all the incumbent governors that Trump went after have won their primaries. But yeah, national Democrats are now kind of colluding with Trump.
What's funny you said, I'm going to play an ad now and ask you about it. Here it is.
Yeah.
This is one running in Maryland.
Dan Cox, Donald Trump's hand-picked candidate for Maryland governor. Cox worked with Trump, trying to prove the last election was a fraud. Dan Cox, too close to Trump, too conservative for Maryland.
Obviously, we know they're trying to say, "Hey, look at who's the more conservative guy." Now, they're not pretending they like the candidate here. Sometimes you see that in these subtle ads. But is this a Donald Trump problem or a Democratic Party aggressiveness?
Well, it's both. But I think this is a perfect example of, the Democratic Party is talking about, defending democracy, but they're spending tens of millions of dollars to promote, conspiracy theory believing, this guy that they're promoting with that ad took 2 busloads of people to the Capitol on January 6th and called Mike Pence a traitor while they were saying,
but
hang
when
Mike
Trump
Pence.
endorses him, is it do you blame the Democratic Party for pointing that out?
Well, Trump shouldn't be endorsing him, but the Democratic Party shouldn't be spending millions of dollars trying to promote conspiracy theorists.
No, I hear you, but if Trump wasn't doing it,
I agree with
you would have a better case.
Look,
right?
Nobody's been standing up more to Donald Trump than me, and I'm going all around the country helping people that Trump is attacking, and we're winning most of them.
Based on what you've gleaned from the January 6th committee and what you've taken away, do you think he should be charged with a crime?
Well, I think that's for the Justice Department to decide, because I think one thing the American people do want is to take the politics out of it and get to the facts of what happened. I think the committee's done a service in bringing a lot of people forward that are finally talking, and we have a lot more information than we did. But that's something the Justice Department has to decide. Look, a lot of people are now talking.
The country. Do you think the country can handle prosecuting a former president?
Yeah, I'm not sure they can, but I think, no man is above the law. So if that's where the facts lead, that's what has to happen. But, a lot of people are talking about January 6th, but I was actually taking action on January 6th. I sent the Maryland State Police, riot police, and I sent the Maryland National Guard, and they were all the first to arrive to defend the leaders of Congress and the vice president.
I want to change subjects slightly on the issue of guns. Your state, the Supreme Court ruling on the New York law meant Maryland's permit law, you were going to have to essentially allow it to happen. Do you feel as if the Supreme Court has constrained your ability to fight guns?
Well, look, I think it really doesn't do a whole lot. I mean, in Maryland, we've got some of the toughest gun laws in the country, but it hasn't stopped the shooting. So 99% of the gun crimes that take place are all illegal guns. It has nothing to do with people that are filing. But they're coming from states that don't have the Maryland laws, correct? Well, they're ghost guns, and they're people that are stealing and trafficking in stolen guns. But the violent crime problem is real. And it doesn't have much to do with, how you go about registration on concealed carry, because the shooters, the repeat violent offenders, they don't follow gun laws.
Yeah. So. No, I hear you. But look at all these mass shootings.
Yep.
Too many of them, they're always, oh, by the way, the gun was purchased legally.
Yeah.
So, and here you have states with red flag laws. that can't be implemented. Is that really the elixir?
Well, look, I signed a red flag law that does work in Maryland, and so we aren't having some of those issues. I'm for universal background checks and for reasonable restrictions, but I've always supported the right of law-abiding citizens to go through a process and to be able to bear arms, but to do everything we possibly can to take guns away from the mentally ill and criminals. And that's the problem in our state. Our legislature keeps voting against penalties for people that shoot people with guns.
What do you think the Supreme Court has been too conservative, about right, or maybe too activist?
I'm not sure whether they've been activists or not, and I'm not a constitutional scholar, but I think the Supreme Court and the people that are on there made decisions based on what they thought their interpretation of the law was. And I know a lot of people conflate, how this came about, but I think some of these issues that hadn't been heard before, they just found a legal reason for taking the action.
Are you worried it's become politicized, the court?
I'm worried about the fact that the country is so dramatically divided, and that some of these issues are going to continue to help us be divided. But I think the vast majority of people in America are just frustrated with all the angry rhetoric on both sides.
I know you're thinking about running for president. What would make you not run?
Well, look, I'm going to do the best job I can being governor until next January, but and I don't know exactly what the future holds. But I do think that there are an awful lot of people, I would call them the exhausted majority of Americans, who are frustrated with the far left and the far right, and they want to see us go in a different direction. So I've seen nothing that would dissuade me from thinking that I think there's a growing demand for exactly what we've done in Maryland over the last 8 years.
You think Donald Trump, if he runs, would ever concede losing a primary?
I'm hopeful that Donald Trump won't be running and won't be the nominee if he does run.
Governor Larry Hogan, Republican from Maryland. It's good to see you, sir.
Thank you, Chuck.
Thank you. When we come back, the Trump White House counsel, Pat Cipollone, sat down with the January 6th committee last Friday. I'm going to talk to committee member Stephanie Murphy about what Cipollone told them and about what we can expect from this week's hearings. Welcome back. The January 6th committee is planning at least 2 more hearings this week. On Friday, former White House counsel Pat Cipollone testified before the committee for 7 hours on President Trump's efforts to overturn the election. This week's first hearing will focus on Mr. Trump's connections to various extremist groups that were involved in the attack, and it's being led by Democrats Jamie Raskin and Stephanie Murphy. And Congresswoman Murphy, a Democrat from Florida, joins me now. Congresswoman, welcome to Meet the Press.
Great to be with you.
Let me start with Pat Cipollone's testimony. Was it as critical as you thought it would be?
Of course it was. He had relevant information about what was happening in the White House, and we are really grateful to him that he was willing to come before the committee and share that with us. Of course, there were areas in which he claimed privilege, but it was important for us to understand what the president's top legal advisor thought about the activities that were happening post-election and in the run-up to January 6th.
Can you give me an idea of what he would not touch?
He claimed privilege on conversations that related to the advice he provided directly to the president or conversations with the president. But I think we still got a lot of relevant information from him, and it provides us another perspective on what was happening in the White House in those weeks running up to January 6th that were so critically important.
I've seen some reports, other fellow committee members said Mr. Cipollone did not contradict previous witnesses. Did he confirm testimony that Cassidy Hutchinson gave?
I think there was a lot of information that fit into this bigger puzzle that we're putting together, and we have different voices telling about the same meeting and more or less telling the same narrative. Of course, you have to understand these are all folks who have had a year plus since the events, and so everybody has a different level of memory or recall on specific details. But the overall message that we have been gathering out of all of these witnesses is that the president knew he had lost the election, or that his advisors had told him he had lost the election, and that he was casting about for ways in which he could retain power and remain the president, despite the fact that the democratic will of the American people was to have President Biden be the next elected.
Was it clear that the president was told his actions that he wanted to take were illegal?
I think he was given the best possible advice by very talented legal folks, both from Barr at the Department of Justice as well as within the White House in legal counsel. And they gave him very strong advice. What we were able to ascertain from those folks is what their activities were, what they said. And as you have seen in some of the hearings, they said in no unclear terms that these were lines that could not be crossed for the sake of democracy.
Can you confirm if he said, we're going to get charged with every crime imaginable? I mean, that was a big, important moment in Cassidy Hutchinson's testimony. Were you able to have him confirm that that is a concern he had?
We were able to get him to confirm the concerns that he did have, his reservations about some of the things that were happening, his desire not to be affiliated with, some of the things, his desire to be on the record, have
not affiliated with what? When you say some of the things,
the speech at the Ellipse. Okay. He didn't attend the speech at the Ellipse.
Did he try to get language struck out of it?
He, not to get too much in the details, I think for legal counsel, they participated and they can perform the role that they have when speeches do come to them.
The Jeffrey Clark scheme, it was referred to that he called that a murder-suicide pact. Were you able to get that confirmed out of him?
He made very clear that he thought the Eastman theory, which was this idea that the vice president could somehow unilaterally declare the president-elect, or that the pressure on the Department of Justice, he sided with the Department of Justice on their findings of no fraud in the election. He made very clear that he took the side of many of the folks that you've already seen come before the committee and was asserting that there wasn't enough evidence to prove that the election was not free and fair, and that, the right thing to do, I think, for a democracy is to have a peaceful transfer of power, especially after December 14th, when the states have certified their electors.
One of the more striking responses to supposedly things that Mr. Cipollone said was from Jared Kushner. It's a clip we've seen a lot. I want to play it.
I know that, he was always, him and the team were always saying, oh, we're going to resign, we're not going to be here if this happens, if that happens. So I kind of took it up to just be whining, to be honest with you.
Number one, did Mr. Cipollone have any reaction to this idea that his threats for resignation were just simply chalked up to whining?
I think when you look at legal advice that's given, because you have to understand, Mr. Cipollone wanted to see President Trump succeed. And so he was giving him the best legal advice he could to ensure his success. And if he got to a place where he felt like he couldn't morally stand by some sort of action, resigning isn't an act of whining. It is a ultimate protest that his advice was being ignored, and what the president moved forward with was something he didn't want to be associated with. So I'm not sure that I would have characterized it as whining.
Let's go to your hearing on Tuesday. Number one, are we going to see much of Mr. Cipollone's testimony on Tuesday? Or then the first hearing this week?
We are always receiving new information from a lot of different sources, and we are trying to pull the information that the American people most need to hear. And I imagine that you will be hearing things from Mr. Cipollone, but also from others that were in the White House. The focus of this next hearing will be on the domestic violent extremists, as well as members of Congress, people that the president called in to assist him in this pressure campaign. And this pressure campaign is a follow-on to the previous hearings where we talked about how the president pressured the vice president, pressured the Department of Justice, pressured state election and electors to just call the race in his favor. And he, in the waning days leading up to January 6th, called in additional support.
Congressman Raskin has called it convergence. These groups like the Proud Boys and the Oath Keepers and what they were doing here, they wouldn't be here without the president wanting them here. But are you going to be able to provide evidence that's more than just convergence, that there was an absolute understanding as to why the president invited them to Washington?
Without spoiling anything that comes this week and encouraging folks to tune in to the specifics, what I will say is that we will lay out the body of evidence that we have that talks about how the president's tweet on the wee hours of December 19th of Be There, Be Wild was a siren call to these folks. And we'll talk in detail about what that caused them to do, how that caused them to organize, as well as who else was amplifying that message.
And you have evidence of specific members of Congress were somehow involved in amplifying and encouraging these groups to come?
Yes, I think all of that is pretty public. They were quite public about their efforts to amplify the president's call to use January 6th as a last stand in this effort to remain as president.
Congresswoman Stephanie Murphy, appreciate you coming in.
So great to be with you.
All right, we'll be watching this week. Thanks. When we come back, is President Biden the Democrats' best bet in 2024? Panel is next. Welcome back, panelists here. NBC News senior Washington correspondent Hallie Jackson. Mark Leibovich of The Atlantic, and he's author of the new book, Thank You for Your Servitude. We're going to get into it in a little bit. Rich Lowry's editor of National Review, and Daniela Gibbs-Leger is the executive vice president of the Center for American Progress. And since the first half of our show was about sort of the hand-wringing going on inside the Democratic Party, Daniela, I'll let you get first crack here, which is... what is the issue at the White House? Are they not meeting the moment? Are expectations too high on the left? What say you?
Maybe it's a little bit of both. Yeah. Look, it is a national pastime here in D.C. to talk about Democrats infighting. You know, I was using an analogy the other day. It's like
Dems in disarray, right?
Dems in disarray, exactly.
Kind of
that is totally a hashtag this town thing to say.
Speaking of this town,
exactly.
Just what he wanted to hear.
Right, but it's like Democrats. We went out and bought a house, and they're sitting outside arguing about what color to paint it. Meanwhile, the Republican Party is literally burning the house down to the ground. That is how I view this argument. Like there are bigger fish to fry, and what you need to be doing is being focused like a laser beam on November. Like that is what is most important, and making sure the American people know there's a really big choice.
Hallie, what are you hearing out of the White House? What is it that they're pushing back?
Because I was on the phone with folks over there yesterday ahead of the show asking about this exact thing. No, we're probably going to talk about it. And I think there is a frustration, obviously. There's also a sense of like, listen, we are doing stuff. People just don't see it necessarily, or people don't see how engaged the president is. It is not a shock to you, I'm sure, Chuck, that that's what the White House is saying in defense of President Biden. But on the flip side of things, I was speaking with a Democratic member of Congress who said, yeah, there is real frustration on a couple of fronts. First, you've got frontliners, right, the more moderate folks who are up in these races in the midterms who feel like he's got to be doing more on the economy. There's a sense that there's a good jobs report out, objectively good jobs report out, right, on Friday. Why didn't the president do more to highlight it? He talked about it, yes. I think there were some people who wanted to see a more forceful response. On the other side, you have the progressives that are saying abortion, guns, where are you on this, right? Yes, he did that event on reproductive rights just this past week, the president did. But there was a sense that I've heard from people of saying, where was this the day that the Supreme Court made the decision? Why aren't you doing X, Y, and Z? I think the White House response is, listen, we had things ready to go the day the decision came down. We're working on it. We've got our legal team doing it. It's not like they're hearing these suggestions and ignoring them.
You know, there's an expression, politics abhors a vacuum. Well, guess who's seen this vacuum? It's Gavin Newsom. I want to play this ad that he's running in Florida.
Freedom, it's under attack in your state. I urge all of you living in Florida to join the fight, or join us in California, where we still believe in freedom. Freedom of speech, freedom to choose, freedom from hate, and the freedom to love. Don't let them take your freedom.
Now, look, we can carve this up two ways, Mark. Look, Newsom is, he joined Truth Social. He's trying to pick fights with Trump. He's trying to pick a fight with DeSantis. But the messaging in there was fascinating, and I think that's what you hear from Democrats. Why isn't the White House? And this is when he says, where's the party? I think this was him saying, hey, guys, look, try this message.
Exactly. And I think, to be perfectly clear, I don't think Gavin Newsom cares about whether 10 people in Florida move to California because they saw a bunch of ads. I mean, his message is to go national with these ads, as he is. Get the attention of people, get the attention of the White House. And look, it's a compelling message. And Gavin Newsom, frankly, with all due respect to President Biden, delivers it a lot more compellingly than a guy who's been on the national stage for as long as the current president is. So, look, I think it's very effective. I think it's a vacuum that is being filled, and I think this is probably a product of its own weakness from the White House.
Now, Rich, we're going to get to the Republican leadership problems in the next block, but it does feel as if Republicans only will have themselves to blame if they can't counter this.
Well, I think the Newsom thing, it's just to promote himself and to get us chatting about him.
The freedom message is a fascinating thing to try to reclaim that word.
He's going to have to work really hard to reclaim that, given policy in California. But look, on Biden, I think there was this period of euphoria after the election where people kind of puffing him up into something that he wasn't. And now there's this period of existential despair when people are realizing what he actually is. He won presidency by default. He's nearly 80 years old in a hugely demanding job. And it's not as though he hasn't said, from my perspective, incredibly over-the-top things about guns and abortion and voting and everything people want him to rise to the moment on. It's just he's not very compelling or vigorous. And that's just who he is, and it's not going to get any better.
Well, I would just say, as much as it relates to the 2024 chatter, I heard somebody said this to me, and I think there's some validity to it, that the single biggest thing that's going to stop this chatter about President Biden in 2024 is when and if Donald Trump announced he's running in 2024. Because there is nothing like that in the eyes of, I think, some folks that will solidify the Democratic Party around Joe Biden and put an end to the, Dems in disarray hashtag, at least temporarily.
All right, but I want to play this ad, Daniela, that's in North Carolina, Cher Beasley, making it clear she doesn't want to be associated with either party. Take a listen.
We all know Washington doesn't make a lot of sense. So why send the same politicians and expect it to change? The special interests have too much power, and neither political party is getting it right.
And clearly, look, that's the only way she's going to get to 50% in that state. We know those last 5% of voters in North Carolina, that's tough. Can Democrats succeed and distance themselves from Washington at the same time?
Yes, they can, because politics are local. This is a local election about what's happening in North Carolina, and she needs to state clearly what she is going to do to deliver for the people in her state, how she will differentiate herself from what's happening in Washington, D.C. And again, this is a tale as old as time, people running away from the current occupant of the White House and focusing on how they're going to be independent and they're going to be different. And Joe Biden is not.
It also never works. It never works. If the president's at 38, it doesn't matter who you are or what you say.
But we've also never had a Supreme Court deliver the type of decisions they deliver. We never had the attention around gun violence happening. I think this is different than other midterm elections.
Well, but also the face of the opposition party remains Donald Trump. I mean, you can go to the middle of the Charlotte airport in North Carolina and say, hey, there's going to be a rematch between Joe Biden and Donald Trump in 2 years. How do you feel about this? I guarantee you 7 out of 10 of them are going to say, oh, just kill me now. I mean, this is not an appealing message from the defining figures in both parties right now, which is why an ad like this is very effective, I think.
I guess the other thing is there any way they change this narrative? You said it has to be Trump just has to announce. Is there any success they can have, or are we in this baked into November?
Yeah, you mean short of that, basically.
Yeah.
I think Gina Raimondo was struck that she acknowledged to you pretty clearly that inflation is the reason why so many people are unhappy with the state of the country right now. And until I think there is... Yeah. What's that face?
No, I just don't understand why they haven't been. I don't get why they haven't done some of these small things.
This is what I think you're hearing from members, from lawmakers, right?
Yeah.
Well, you asked her about that, right? And so, but I do think that is, to me, when I have these conversations with the folks here who are lawmakers who are coming in and reflecting with their constituents, say it's so much about the economy and inflation. It is about the Supreme Court decision, but I think there is still a question mark, at least for now, as to how much that's actually going to drive people to the polls. A lot of people say they will. You heard that in that opening piece, but how much are you going to actually see that until we get to November?
Last week had 5% of people as the top issue, abortion. 5%.
We will find out there. I don't understand. Some ideas to tackle inflation are too small to have an impact. Others are small, but let's see if it has an impact. They don't seem to have the same story for every idea that's floated out there. Anyway, when we come back, a story that takes more than 280 characters to tell. Elon Musk is trying to drop out of his $44 billion deal to buy Twitter. Kara Swisher joins me next to explain why this matters. Welcome back. Elon Musk is a man who makes headlines, few bigger than when he announced on Friday that he now wants out of his mega $44 billion deal to buy Twitter and take it private. What happened and why? No better person to answer those questions than my friend Kara Swisher, co-host of Vox Media's Pivot podcast. Kara, welcome back to the show. This feels like the most predictable potential next thing that was going to happen the day he decided to buy it.
Yeah.
So you're probably not surprised. But is he still going to own Twitter anyway?
Well, if a court makes him buy it right now, I mean, I think that's where it's going to go to. It's all a legal proceeding now. And I think it'll be hard for the court to force someone to pay that much money for something. And it's a little unprecedented. And of course, they have Elon Musk, who likes to fight. And so he's going to fight with the Delaware courts. He's going to fight with Twitter. He's going to fight publicly. And so it could be a big mess, and everyone might want to just have him pay the $1 billion breakup fee and go. But it could be a lot higher. He may have to, if Twitter presses it, he may have to pay a lot more for trying to get out of this deal.
And what's it mean for Twitter? I mean, look, this is a public square that certainly there's plenty of political debate that's sparked from it. It matters to a small group of people, but it does matter a lot. What happens to the company? What happens to the product?
Nothing good for Twitter has come out of this sort of Elon Musk is bored routine that's been going on. I mean, obviously he's interested in the company because he likes the product, but a lot of this has become a circus, a ridiculous circus. And so I think it's not good for Twitter. It puts them in a bad position to have to do this lawsuit, especially with someone who doesn't care and attack, sort of attacks them on their own platform, which is kind of ironic in a weird way. But it's not good for them. They've never had a very strong business, which is one of the reasons someone like Elon Musk or another buyer could do something with it. It's still a large platform, even though it's a small business. It really is. And so for years it's underperformed, whether it's the stock or the revenues and this and that. And so, there was a lot of promise here, of possibility, but nothing good is going to come of this for them. And being in court against someone like that is not good for the business, not good for employee retention, not good for branding, advertisers, so not good.
So if bad for Twitter, good for who? Is this a boom for TikTok, a boon for Instagram? Who?
I guess, it does. They're just watching quietly from the sidelines while this goes on. It can't be good. They weren't much of a competitor to Facebook or TikTok. TikTok's been growing like crazy. Even Snapchat was doing very well until the recent downturn. Everybody's been hit, really hard in the stock sell-off. But they all were doing fine without Twitter, so it's not really going to affect them.
All right. All I know is it's Elon Musk, which means we will all be paying a lot of attention to this drama as it plays out in a Delaware.
Or not. Maybe not now, Chuck.
Maybe not. All right. Fair enough. Kara Swisher, you always make us smarter. Thank you. When we come back, a conservative party dumps its leader after a series of scandals and embarrassments. Why the cases of Boris Johnson and Donald Trump so far have had very different endings. Stay with us. Welcome back. Now to the Republicans. So, Rich, there was a scandal plague, an embarrassing leader of the Conservative Party in the UK, and there was finally the enough is enough moment, and they got rid of Boris. Arguably, Mitch McConnell had a moment where he could have done the same thing the way the UK does, essentially the vote of no confidence. We're dumping our leader. He can never be leader again. This American Conservative Party hasn't done it. Why?
Well, one, it's a different system. Two, the British Tories have an ingrained culture of stabbing their leaders in the back and in the front without compunction. And if decisions were being made in smoke-filled rooms here, the outcome would be differently about Trump, but that's not the way it works in our system. And at the end of the day, the issue is Trump has a significant hold on Republican voters. And critics of Trump, enemies of Trump who want him to go away, just need to constantly remind themselves the people they need to convince, the fence-sitting Republicans, voted for him twice. They like him. They're entertained by him. They're grateful for many things that he did. They hate the media, and they think Trump is often attacked unfairly. So from my perspective, the person who's likely to win over those voters from Trump eventually is someone Trump critics probably hate as well, someone like Ron DeSantis rather than a Liz Cheney.
Hallie, what do you hear on this?
Yeah, I think that's right. I think the Trump-DeSantis factor is a fascinating one here. You talked about that Gavin Newsom ad. You talked about the way that DeSantis has kind of become like and this is, let me think of a way to put it, but like if Donald Trump doesn't run, does Ron DeSantis take that mantle, right? But it's a different system he's got. I mean, Mark and I were talking about, he's got a small circle of people around him. It's not like Donald Trump where it's this sprawling group of advisors, tons of people who are always talking about his plans, et cetera. I do think that if you look at 2024, I think that Mike Pence is clearly going to run. I do not think, as much as Mike Pence wants to have a hold on the sort of MAGA members of the Republican Party, he does not. I think that that's a question mark. I think evangelical Republicans he can make the case to. I think that more broad appeal is going to be elusive for him.
Well, let's get to your book, Mr. Leibovich, because in many ways, if you read your book, thank you for your servitude here, you get the explanation for why what happened in the UK isn't yet happening here. And I want to start with this excerpt, because I think it gets at the core of actually the Republicans not understanding what's happened with Trump. And the censors, be careful. If you're a Republican in Washington, this is an outgoing Republican member of Congress said this to you. If you're a Republican in Washington, the idea is basically to make yourself as much of a D-head as possible in order to get attention and impress the biggest D-head of all, the guy sitting in the White House. Finish the anecdote for me, because
I'm
it's
not going to finish the D-head.
No, but he would not put his name on this quote. Explain to me what he told you.
Because he said I might have to lobby them one day. Isn't it depressing? I mean, they actually said, isn't it depressing?
They said the isn't it
yes,
depressing,
the whole
not
thing.
you.
They made the entire point for me in this book. And look, conversations like this happen again and again in this book. Thank you for your servitude, have to say the title. It is, you see the gap between, one, what Republicans will say publicly and privately play out again and again and again. And look, it's not like there's not a tradition of Republicans pushing back on the leadership of their party in America. I mean, the private view of Republicans towards this president is extremely harsh. It's extremely mocking. And look, politicians are always going to say different things in public and private before different audiences. I've never seen a gap wider than
Okay, but JDL, the thing that, Rigby, did this outgoing member of Congress understand the fact that he saw his service in Congress as a bridge to lobbying? Does he not understand that that's why Trump was able to get these
yes, exactly.
get the hole, right? Like, did he understand that part of the joke?
Apparently not. I mean, that literally is the problem. And I mean, I think you're right. Like, Republicans have to figure out what's more important to them. Is it the immediacy to power, or do they care about their legacy? Do they care about what history books are going to write about them? As I say this, I'm like, of course they don't care, because they've shown over and over again it's more important for them to win the next election than to, like, I don't know, maybe stand up for our democracy.
Look, Lindsey Graham told you, I've never been called this much by a president in my life.
Yeah,
I mean, he was addicted.
They're all addicted. Look, I mean, there are any number of psychological reasons why people do certain things, and make decisions like this. I mean, it was funny. Rich and I were in the green room before when Governor Hogan said, well, Republicans need to sort of figure out what they need to do. And they're trying to, it's like, it's been 7 years. I mean, based on the precedent of recent history, the Republican MO in dealing with Donald Trump is fecklessness. And in doing this book, I learned this over and over and over again. And I don't think the revolution is going to be led by Lindsey Graham or Kevin McCarthy or Mitch McConnell. And look, they've had the chance to do it over and over and over again. If he can survive January 6th, and for a few days it looked like he wasn't, and be where he is today.
This brings me to this. If he runs, will somebody explain to me how he accepts losing?
Yeah, that's
you know the answer to that question.
That's a big conundrum. Look, I think there's probably maybe a 15% chance he doesn't run, but very likely he's in.
Seems like all these people told you was death.
Right.
That was the only answer is death. How many times did you get that?
The only plan we have, this is another Republican congressman, a former Republican congressman, I said, look, we have no plan for this except sitting around hoping he dies. And again, these conversations, it's all so depressing, but it's also a fun book and it's a great beat. But no, I mean, it's these conversations happen over and over again. And what casts it in such sharp relief, and over the last few months, is you see what's happening in England, you see what's happening on the January 6th Commission. The courage that actually does happen in conservative circles is cast in such sharp relief with the putative leadership of the Republican Party.
It is both a fun read, as you said, and absolutely infuriating. Congratulations. That's all we have for today. Thank you for watching. Enjoy the rest of your weekend. And remember, if it's Sunday, it's Meet the Press.